April 1st, 1945, men of the 4th Marine Regiment boarded their landing craft and set their course for the Japanese island of Okinawa. Codenamed Operation Iceberg, this would soon become the largest and bloodiest land battle in the Pacific War. At first, the landings came easy. The Marines met little resistance, surging inland and racing ahead of schedule, but their good fortune would not last. Well-concealed Japanese forces inflicted significant casualties at strong points in the north of the island as the Marines pressed forward and mopped up Japanese troops. These devil dogs then redeployed to the south, where the Japanese had concentrated their resistance. There, in the mud and rain across the shattered hills and fortified lines, the battle reached a savage crescendo. The 4th Marines fought yard by yard, eventually succeeding in fighting their way to the city of Naha. These Marines went toe-to-toe with a desperate and cunning enemy force across a nearly inhospitable landscape, often relying only on the equipment and supplies on their back to keep them alive in the jungle. And this is what they carried. Welcome back to What They Carried. Today, we're headed over to the Pacific to take a look at the equipment that would have been used by a U.S. rifleman in the 4th Marine Regiment during Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa. I'm going to pull back to the staging area so we can take a closer look at my uniform and the equipment that I have on. Now that we're back in the staging area, let me go through some of the gear and equipment that I have on and tell you a bit about this Marine Corps uniform and what makes it unique. So what I'm armed with is the standard US M1 Garand. This was the standard rifle for riflemen in the Marine Corps, and there's nothing too special about this M1 Garand, but it does have some World War II era features like lock bar sights. The sights used during the war had a little locking system here to allow you to lock down the sights and keep it from moving off of your zero. It has a single slot gas screw, and of course it has the cleaning kit and combination tool in the buttstock. I also have a leather sling on here. This one even has the brass hooks, which was the earlier version of the leather sling. These were common earlier in the war. They were later replaced by the web slings, but you see these used throughout the war's end. Let me set my rifle down and go through the rest of my equipment. This pack that I have here is the upper pack that's part of a pack system, often called the 782 system. You'll also hear this pack referred to as the P41 haversack. This pack was unique to the Marine Corps. It's a bit different than the packs used by the Army, and there was a lower pack that could attach to the bottom of this pack so that you could carry 2 packs at once, and that was kind of a modular system. That way you could carry your important stuff in the top pack and always have it around, and if you needed to ditch that bottom pack, you could either leave that somewhere to lighten your load or pick it up if you needed to carry more equipment. The shovel that I have on here is the standard M1910 T-handle shovel. This is the same shovel that was used in World War I, that was used throughout World War II as well. The cover for this shovel is a bit unique. It has the hanger on the bottom instead of the top like the typical hanger. That's because this type of cover was designed for use with the jungle pack or rucksack. It was actually an Army model, but the Marine Corps was supplied with a lot of these for whatever reason, and they ended up using a lot of US Army gear, which you'll see throughout my loadout here. Next up is my bayonet. Nothing too special about this bayonet, it's just the standard M1 bayonet. It is the later war model. Early in the war, they were still using the M1905, the 16-inch bayonet. The M1 had a 10-inch blade rather than the 16-inch blade. It was a little easier to wield and less cumbersome. Wrapped around my haversack here, I have a blanket roll. Inside of there is my wool blanket as well as this camouflage shelter half. This is different than the shelter halves used by the US Army during World War II, but it's the same concept. Each soldier, or in this case Marine, was issued half of a shelter, and 2 Marines would pair up, button their shelter halves together, and then have a 2-man tent to sleep in. My poncho isn't included in my bedroll. I have that on the front of my pack for easy access. I'm representing Okinawa here after all, where they had tons of rain and monsoons, and we experienced some of that type of weather here yesterday. So I was thankful to have my poncho readily available and not tied up inside my bedroll. I'll take my poncho off first here. So the poncho, along with the other camouflage items that you'll see here, like the helmet cover we'll talk about in a bit, and this shelter half that I was just talking about, it's double-sided. So for Okinawa, you typically see Marines Marines using this green side out, but there is a tan side as well that was better suited for different environments. Let me open up this pack now and show you what I'm carrying inside. So the first thing inside this pack here, I have my little ditty bag, my toiletry bag. Inside here I have my toothbrush, my tooth powder. I have everything I need to shave inside of here, a bar of soap, and a few other items. All the stuff I need to keep me clean and in good health while I'm living in the field. After that, I have 2 K rations here that have gotten a little damaged in my pack, but it looks like I got a breakfast and a dinner unit. I have my M41 jacket tucked inside of here. Now it's pretty warm right now, but on Okinawa at times it got pretty cold. So you see Marines wearing their M41 jackets as well as other items to keep warm like wool undershirts. This wool undershirt here is just the standard Army model. You see Marines wearing these along with other items like jungle sweaters, things like that, anything they had available to keep warm. Some extra laces for my boondockers, some extra handkerchiefs, and then just extra socks and an extra undershirt. So that's all for my pack. It's kind of small, you can't fit a ton in there, and that was kind of the point. Having a small pack forces Marines to travel light. Next up, I have 2 ammunition bandoliers for my M1 Garand. Each of these holds 48 rounds. That's 6 8-round end blocks of 30-06 ammo for the M1. These are the World War II style bandoliers with lot cards to indicate what type of ammo's inside of them and when it was packed, as well as cardboard inserts to protect the rounds. Next up, I have my web gear here. Now, you saw earlier how easily I took off my haversack. There is a method that you could link the haversack to your suspenders. Some might have found that a bit more comfortable, but you see a lot of guys wearing their haversack just like I did, where it's its own unit. That way I can ditch it while keeping my ammo belt and my suspenders on my person. These suspenders are also part of the 782 system, also called P41 suspenders, and this cartridge belt is actually a US Army model. The Marines had a very similar model that just had different markings on it, but you see Marines using both the Army and Marine style cartridge belts. Working around my belt here, I have some first aid kits. So on the bottom here, you'll see the standard Carlisle bandage first aid pouch. Inside of here, I have my Carlisle bandage tin, which includes a bandage and disinfectant powder, and also a package of wound tablets separate from the bandage. Now above that is my jungle first aid kit. So troops fighting in the jungle needed some extra medical supplies. First off, because oftentimes it was tougher to get resupplied or evacuated, so they might need a little bit more equipment on their person because it could be difficult to get to an aid station. But also troops fighting in the jungle face some unique issues. So inside of here you have stuff like insect repellent that was unique to the jungle kit for troops who obviously were encountering lots of crawling insects in the jungle, as well as some additional medical supplies like an extra Carlisle bandage tin, some halazone tablets for water purification, malaria tablets, and more. And it is common to see troops carrying both of these first aid kits. Sometimes you do see combinations like just the jungle kit, just the standard kit. I think I've even seen pictures where guys have 2 jungle kits. It just depended on what was available. Next up, I have my canteens. So I'll turn around so you can see those. I have 2 different covers, a 2nd and 3rd pattern cover. The 3rd is the one here with the crossed flaps. That was a later design. Some of the 3rd pattern canteens had fill holes added at the bottom. That was this stitched hole, and the reason for that was to avoid wasting water. The fill hole would be placed over the top of your canteen, and then you would pour water from a big can into the canteen cover, which would work as a funnel to funnel it into your canteen. Maybe not the most sanitary method, but when water was in such high demand and low supply, they had to make use of every drop. Marines did use a lot of World War I era equipment during the war, and even late in the war you see these metal cap canteens along with a few other early items mixed in with newer things like these fancy plastic cap canteens. The other canteen pouch is just a standard 2nd pattern Marine pouch. And of course I have my canteen cup as well that I can use to mix up beverages like the bouillon packets from my K rations. The final thing I have on my web gear here is a US Mark II fragmentation grenade. There was no prescribed number of fragmentation grenades for each Marine to carry, but typically they would carry as many as they comfortably could and as many as they could get their hands on. Of course, fragmentation grenades came in handy when clearing out Japanese bunkers, foxholes, and other positions, so it's typical to see Marines loaded up with a bunch of these Mark IIs. The helmet that I have on is a standard US M1 helmet. It's the same type of helmet worn by the Army, but you can see I have this Marine Corps cover on it. That's not something you see used by the Army. This cover, as with the other camouflage items I mentioned, is double-sided, so it has this greener side as well as a more tan side for sandy or dirty areas. And this is a later pattern of helmet cover, the second pattern, that has these little foliage slits. Those slits were intended so that you could add vegetation to your helmet to better camouflage it, and on Okinawa you really do see some of the 6th Marine Division Marines taking full advantage of those foliage slits. The M1 helmet was a two-part system. It has the outer shell, which is the protective part that's made of metal, and it also has an inner liner that was made of pressed kind of cardboard material, and that's the part that had the suspension which would hold your helmet on your head. This cover works by tucking in between those two layers, and you can see some of these pieces that would get tucked in. Sometimes the troops would untuck the back of their helmet cover just so that it would cover a bit more of their neck while they were wearing their helmet. This was great to provide a bit more protection from the sun on your neck. Underneath my helmet, I have this US HBT cap on. This is an Army pattern cap, but you see these being used often by the Marines and sometimes worn under their helmet, just like I was doing. The Marines did have their own type of cover. They have that iconic hat with the eagle, globe, and anchor stamped on it, but those really didn't come around in theater till very late in the war. Okay, now let's move on to my uniform here. This uniform that I have on is called the P41 uniform, commonly referred to as dungarees by the Marines who wore them. This was the most common uniform used by Marines during World War II. There were some other uniforms worn as well. There was the camouflage P42 uniform, there was the P44 uniform that came a bit later in the war, but the P41 was the standard for most of World War II. This uniform is made out of a HBT or herringbone twill material. It's a light cotton blend that worked very well for troops in warm climates. The Army made use of similar HBT uniforms, even though they were intended as workwear. They found that this material worked very well for troops on tropical islands, so both the Army and Marines started wearing HBTs. Let me go through some of the equipment in my pockets here. So starting out with my breast pocket here, I have some writing utensils, a fountain pen and pencil. I have a D-bar. These were meant to be emergency ration bars. They were basically a chocolate bar, although they weren't super sweet and tasty like normal chocolate. They didn't want them to be too delicious, so troops would scarf them down. They were meant to be eaten slowly, so the Army didn't want them to be too tasty. But these were very common in the Pacific Theater, and even though they were called an emergency ration, they were often just used to supplement the K and C rations the troops were issued on a daily basis. Interestingly, this is the Marine pattern D-bar, and they have a note on there specifying that Marines should leave their sleeves rolled down to prevent insect bites. You do sometimes see Marines rolling up their sleeves or even cutting them off in theater, but in general, the Marine Corps was very serious about troops keeping their sleeves rolled down for protection. I also have some fuel tablets here. These were intended to heat C rations, but you can use them for the K rations as well. Another handkerchief, a few books of matches here, and some more halazone water purification tablets. In my bottom pockets here, I have some more fuel tablets, a sewing kit so I can make repairs to my gear if needed and keep it in serviceable condition, and some friction tape for the same purpose. In my final pocket here, I have my trusty spoon. I didn't carry a full mess kit with this loadout. I just have my spoon and canteen cup, which was pretty typical for troops on the go. I have some reading material here, just a World War II Yank magazine, some papers and envelopes for letter writing, toilet paper from a K ration, maybe the most important item in my kit, some loose ration bits like these candy coated peanuts, instant coffee, and a couple boxes of caramels, a candle, and a trusty pocket knife. Underneath my P41 shirt, I have this standard Marine Corps white undershirt. These were the same type used by the Navy during World War II. Later in the war, you see Marines wearing kind of a pea green color shirt, and you also see troops dyeing these white shirts as well. The bright white color of these shirts could kind of stand out on the battlefield, so troops did try to dye them, sometimes using things they had on hand like coffee or just rubbing them in the dirt, whatever they could do to tone them down a bit. I also have this standard Marine web belt on. one with a K-bar knife on it. This is a K-bar production knife, but not all knives used by Marines were K-bars. This was just the Mark II knife used by the Navy. I believe the Marines had their own designation for it, but it was the same exact knife. They were made by several companies, but K-bar was the most well-known, and their name became synonymous with this type of fighting knife. I don't have too much in my trouser pockets here, just another one of those Marine D ration bars. On my feet here, I have the Marine Corps leggings. These were very similar to the Army leggings. They just had a few less eyelets on them, and the Army actually moved to a similar pattern with less eyelets on their leggings later in World War II to save on cost. And then on my feet, I have the standard Marine Corps boondockers. They were low boots with the rough side of the leather facing out, similar to the Army's Type 3 service shoe. But the Marine Corps boondockers had a few small differences. They were a slightly different color, they have more of a pointed toe, and they also had a corded sole, which means that hemp cord was mixed in with the rubber used to make the sole to give them a bit better traction. And the final thing I have here are my Marine Corps dog tags. The Marines, like the Army, had 2 dog tags tied around their neck typically, but the Marine Corps ones were shaped a bit differently. They were just a different design, and they also contained different information. The information for both the Army and Marine Corps dog tags changed throughout World War II as they learned and made different decisions about what was important to have to identify a soldier, but all dog tags across the different branches served the same purpose of identifying fallen troops. And that's my full loadout, which is representative of a U.S. Marine Rifleman in the 4th Marine Regiment during Operation Iceberg. I'm used to doing European theater stuff and Army loadouts, so this Marine Corps kit was something a bit new for me. I'm still learning the intricacies of Marine Corps uniforms and equipment, but I had a lot of fun putting this together, and I was really excited to share this with all of you. Huge thank you to atthefront.com. They supplied a good portion of the World War II Marine Corps gear I featured in this video, along with my Marine Corps khaki uniform that I also got some good use out of at the reenactment where I recorded this. You guys are always asking me, where can I buy World War II uniforms and equipment to look like you? Well, look no further than atthefront.com. They have a huge variety of reproduction US and German gear on there from the war, and if you're a history nerd like me, you could probably spend all day on there just shopping and looking through their catalog, so check it out through the link in the description. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Keep your sleeves rolled down to avoid bug bites, and I'll see you in